Good afternoon, Stephen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
How was the rockstar life? No, I heard you went on tour recently for art shows and for readings of your book. How was that rockstar life?
It was uh, uh, minimal, as it were, compared to a rock
Minimal.
star life. It was it was great, great fun to perform the book, as it were, to read from the book for people, and but of course, the audience for such things is relatively small, but still, it was all of the readings went well, and then I was also at an opening of a show of mine in Reno, Nevada, show of my photographic work, and that was quite fun as well. So, but tiring. It was a lot of travel. It's up and down the West Coast, basically.
I'm guessing it was tiring but fulfilling as well.
Yes, yes. I lived in San Francisco for many years, and so much of what was particularly fulfilling about it was just being back and seeing many friends and people who are, for all intents and purposes, family to me, and spending time with them and catching up with people in a more deliberate way than one can do when one isn't in the same room with someone.
Right, being just in person with friends,
Makes a
family.
difference. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was quite fulfilling, but also had emotional. It was an emotional time because of that. But I do enjoy the performance of doing a reading, and unlike many readings that one may do in the world, the readings that I happen to be scheduled on were either with friends or with people, in any case, whose work I also liked a great deal. So it was, some readings with a few people, some readings just with one other person. And in all cases, I felt like the work, I enjoyed hearing their work also. So that's an important thing, and that's not always the case.
Oh, it's really good. It sounds like, in a sense, it's almost like you and your peers, your friends, your family. You were literally opening up your souls to each other.
Yeah, yeah. In some way, I think that's true. I mean, for that, the best of a reading is like that. I think if the people who are doing the reading have a feeling for the moment and a feeling for their relationship to the audience, and I think it can feel very intimate and very personal for everyone, even though there are many people in the room.
How was it then to, you spent months, if not years, I'm guessing, writing the book, and you get to that point where you're face to face with another person and reading out loud the final version of the book. How was that feeling?
Well, this is now my coda, the book that I was on tour promoting is my sixth such book, and so it's never gets old, but there are many difficult things about it and many rewarding things about it. Of course, when one works on something for a very long time, and then as one sees it through publication, a work is finished long before it's published, much of the time. So it's an interesting thing to be moving back into work that one has already. I've been working on it consistently for many years, as you say, and I tend to work on things simultaneously, more than one manuscript. So, but it's you're never reading the work that you're most presently working on. You're reading work
Because of
that
the gap.
because of the gap between completion and publication. That's okay. In a certain way, having that gap allows the work to solidify, in a sense, to congeal. It feels like it has a substance of its own that you are no longer in control of. So you are approaching it as a reader on a certain level. I mean, you have a very intimate relationship with the text, but on many levels it ceases to be yours, which is interesting. You come to it as the most familiar reader of the text, and the text stops having an author on some level. You just are the person who gets to introduce it to other people, in a sense. So I like doing it. One finds out things about the work by reading it aloud that one doesn't know about the work when one is just reading it silently or sounding it in one's head. And reading it in front of an audience also changes the ways in which one understands what's happening with the work. I would say that for me, I do read aloud a lot in composition. It's important, the way in which a work sounds is important to me. And then I also do an audiobook of the work, or of my books as they come out, or I have for the last 3 books, including Coda, which, by the way, if anyone is interested, they can download for free the audiobook of Coda.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I make that available freely to the public. I hope that it intrigues people enough to then purchase the book for the purposes of supporting the publisher and other things, because reading it on the page is quite different than hearing it. But I think it's an interesting way of presenting the work to people, to present it as a fully read work. So, and then when one is doing that reading in front of an audience, one sees where they laugh, where they don't laugh, where one feels the connection with people or not, the energy of connection that happens in performance. At least happens for me in performance, maybe not for everyone, but it does for me. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, because in a sense, you're almost doing a live show with a quote unquote audience, and you can almost, I imagine, you can almost see where, because the audience is reacting to the ideas, it's almost like you can pinpoint where you're most resonating with the audience.
Yeah,
you're resonating through the idea to the audience.
Sure. Yes. And you can have a sense. Sometimes you have more of a sense than others. Some audiences are more responsive than others. So you know, and because it's your own text, you have a sense. You know what's about to come, what's about to happen in terms of the language. So you know where there is a moment to pause, and where you might make the pause longer if you understand that your interlocutors in the room seem to be experiencing the reading of the work in a particular kind of way. And so you can be responsive. You speed up, you slow down, you do these various things in interesting ways. I mean, sometimes if you, for me, this is true. It's not true for a lot of people, but of course, it's fantastic when one has a sense that the room is with you. And they are understanding you and have a sense of what you're doing. I also find it extremely interesting, and given the nature of my work, this does happen, though it didn't in these readings that I did recently. But I find it interesting when it seems like the room is not with me, when it feels like there's a real sense of confusion in the audience. They don't know how to hear what I'm doing, or they're not understanding, and they're perplexed in a way. Sometimes people are perplexed by difficult work, or by work that has a certain sort of obscurity and complexity, and they find that intriguing. They want to understand it or decode it, as it were. At least have a sense of what's happening in it. Sometimes it makes people angry when they don't understand something, and I like that too. I think that's interesting when people are provoked to, and that's okay. I think that means that the work is doing something right. If people when people dislike it radically or when people feel pushed away in a certain sense, that's okay. They can sometimes those people will come back to the work because that response is a sign that something is happening for them in the work.
Because if nothing happens, it means probably you're not saying anything new to them.
Yeah, or
You're
you're not finding anything in them. They're just not listening to you. They're bored. Also, being bored is an interesting thing, but um, but yeah. In any case, I find this is true with with art practice as well. People who are confused are sometimes in the best position, confused, perplexed as to the reason why this work is in front of them in any way and how to approach it. That those people are on the cusp of something.
on the cusp of something.
On the cusp of realizing of some kind of realization.
Oh, a realization for themselves.
Yes.
Oh.
And to paraphrase Wittgenstein, I would never want to spare anyone the trouble of thinking for themselves. So
An answer found for themselves is much, much more valuable than an answer given by someone else to them.
yes, and sometimes they won't pursue it, but that's okay. Too, people find what they need in their own, or they find what they find, whether they need it or not. So, yeah.
Is this something that because you mentioned published 6 books already?
Yeah.
So is this this even level of comfort and desire to provoke something, some emotion, ignite some passion, some anger, some perplexity, make people feel something? Is it something that you grew more comfortable with, you pursued more throughout your writing career, or is it something that was always with you, was always a part of you as a writer?
I think it was always a part of me as a writer. It certainly, I became more comfortable with it as a performer of the writing. So in those two distinct ways, as a writer, I always the writing has always roughly taken a similar form, and I mean with variations, but it moved through different ways of or modes of expression that are nonetheless always fairly radically obscure to many people. They are challenging to people, and challenging in ways that much of the literature that I care about is challenging. The way that, say, philosophical literature, the literature of Western philosophy, or or certain types of poetry and prose are quite challenging by nature and by design. And those are the things that I suppose that I was emulating when I started writing when I was much younger, when I was a teenager, and they're still very present for me. So in the writing, but I wrote for a long time before publishing any of this work, and as it started to come out, certainly I had to grow used to being in front of people as a representative of that work, and reading it and performing it and all of that. And now I think I'm fairly good at it, but that's also, I have to practice it. I think about it as a kind of performance. I want if I'm doing a reading, I want it to be something. I want, for my own purposes, I want to do something different with it than is just reading it on the page. I don't think that doing readings is a substitute for reading work on the page, which is the thing that I want to have, is for people to read the books. And but nonetheless, it can be a generative experience in its own right, both for the reader and for the audience.
I think you touched on something very important, which is the performance side of it. Because what can happen a lot of times, not just with writing, but with creative outlets in general, because you make it or you create it, you have the idea, you create it, it works, it exists in the world. And then when you think about going to present it to someone else, to an audience, or even to just a friend, you, you know, I know the material, I know what is there, I'll just show up and do it.
Yeah.
But in a sense, it's doing a disservice to the recipient, to the audience, because you're not prepared. You're just going, you're winging it. You're just going based on what you already know, what comes to it, your spontaneity. But I think your admittance to preparing, to wanting to show up as the best version of yourself as a performer really speaks volumes to the care that you put into your work.
Yes. I find it perplexing that people are not interested in doing that sometimes, or seem to not be. I think that there are a number of ways in which it's something as simple as somebody tells you this is how long you should read for this event. That's how long you should read, not longer than that. For instance, as an example, you keep it. Understand that lengthening or being in front of people for longer is not necessarily accretive. You don't get more for the work. They don't get more as an audience necessarily. There's a point, and if you leave when they're wanting more, that's better than having given them too much. So just keeping that in mind when one is preparing for doing a reading, and then understanding that you reading the work, especially if the work has any sort of lyric element to it, you are, and for me, the work is written in a kind of prose form where I think many readers of the work on the page, not all, but many, won't sound it in their minds as or actually read it out loud as they're reading it. So they may not quite realize the prosody of the writing, the ways in which it has a kind of metrical or rhythmic motion to it. And so part of my job as a reader when I do that, or even in the audiobooks, is to show people how to read the book, to demonstrate to them what it's like to hear this language, which is, I hope, uncanny, strange language that seems like something that they can't quite wrap their minds around in a certain way. And it's, as you know, the syntax is quite circuitous. There are lots of repetitions, which are slight variations. It's a work that, or my work in general, expects and asks a lot of a reader. And sometimes people are immediately up for that, and sometimes it takes them time because it's not work that they've experienced before, or kind of work they've experienced before.
I can attest to that in a positive way, because I was reading some of it this morning, in preparation for the show, and one of two things that struck me instantly was the language itself, because as you're saying, it's not day-to-day language; it's quite specific language. It's not pretentious, if you will. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's selective. It shows that you put thought behind each particular word there. Like you're saying as well, I didn't, hear the musicality of it. I was trying to read the text on the page, but now thinking back to it, I can see, oh yeah, those selections of words, they were so particular because they augmented that musicality of the sentence, of the paragraph. And the other thing that really struck me, and this might be specifically Portuguese, I don't know, but it really reminded me of those great authors that we read during classes, where we had to really read and read and read again to really extract the meaning behind the sentences, because you
Hmm.
will never get it on first pass.
Yes. Yes. Who are you thinking of?
Um, a lot of Fernando Pessoa and
Hmm.
I'm forgetting the word, is personas.
Hmm. Yes.
Sorry, I'm forgetting the correct name, but the different authors that he
The
has involved
heteronyms.
with.
Heteronyms.
Heteronyms, exactly.
Yes. Yes.
And in a sense as well, Camões as well,
Hmm.
because of
Hmm.
what you mentioned, the specific number of syllables to get a certain rhythm to the sentences. It
Yes.
Reading it this morning and speaking with you now, getting the first experience from the author himself really connects everything together for me now.
Yeah. 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 No, that's great. And I think it's a uniquely Portuguese thing that an author as extraordinary, uh, I'll just say Pessoa, as Pessoa is known by everyone. It's as the kind of the great modernist national writer.
Mm-hmm.
And Pessoa is an extraordinary and difficult writer. And I think that is speaks to a certain level of sophistication in Portuguese education, that people are able to approach that literature. Everyone is, and everyone does, and everyone loves it and finds it compelling. And the Portuguese, the sort of general Portuguese relationship to Portuguese language, how it can be quite a bit more subtle than it is in broadly speaking other language cultures, certainly in American English language culture.
Yeah, it's one of the things that fascinated me in reading Coda. Apologies, I have not read your other books yet, but
Yeah.
reading Coda now, I don't want to sound mean here, but it almost didn't sound like English in the sense
Mm,
that it was much more rich in meaning and thinking than regular English.
yeah.
Because obviously, if you look at the spectrum, you have something like Shakespeare, which is not modern English, period.
No. Yes.
But then your writing was modern English, but a very curated language selection.
Yes. Yes. And I think it borrows a lot from other syntactical ways of using language and from other languages, which are and other literatures that are important to me and that have certainly infused my work and my way of thinking as a writer. And Pessoa is absolutely one of them as an extraordinarily important writer to me. Yeah.
And but there was a question I wanted to sneak in, because for listeners and people pick up the book for the first time, and
Yeah.
if they read the description itself, there's I found a very interesting sentence in there, and I'd like to pick your thoughts on this.
Okay.
So there is a part in the description that calls out the epistemological regress of desire, intention, knowledge, and discernment.
Hmm.
Can you tell us a bit more on how you bring that to life in the writing?
Yeah, I suppose to say that those are all characteristics that we understand as the psychological manifestations of subjectivity, you could say. The things, those are all things that constitute the ontology of the ego or of the self. And I think that for me, literature in general and my literary project is a way of interrogating that notion of the stability of the self and of the possibility of a kind of selfdom in relationship to a world that is itself rather, or an outside that is also radically unstable, always in motion. So we are stuck with a set of epistemological questions that inform any possible motivation, any expression of desire or possible fulfillment. And in a sense, we have to make choices based on, not just based on what seems immediately or what seems self-evident to us epistemologically, our immediate experience and the ways in which it presents as though it were immediately clear to us. But we come to understand the ways in which we are often mistaken in assuming that clarity. Our assumptions are frequently wrong. I think we all have this experience. The things that we think we see are not there. The things we think we hear, the ways in which memory constitutes what we understand to be happening now, whether or not it's a memory of a specific sensory experience of any kind, or a perceptual experience, or a memory that is more pointedly in relationship to an emotional state. All of these things are, we assume kind of a stability of a sort, but a moment's reflection helps us realize that that stability is illusory. I mean, there is a kind of stability and an absence of stability at the same time. So these questions can be paralyzing, needless to say. And in a certain way, one hopes they will be. That's the point of that one wants to reduce people to paralysis before one then begins to build towards the possibility of action again, or activity again. One wants to, because it's the only way to remove the say delusions of ideology from the ways in which we approach other people or approach the world around us.
Yeah, I can see quite a number of applications to this, because you're echoing that sentiment of, I know what's going on in my life. I know the sky is blue, for example. I know there is a window in front of me. But if I'm just looking at the window and the sky through the window, I'm missing everything else. I'm missing the walls. I'm missing the tables. And in that world that's outside of my perception of what can happen, danger, opportunities. And if you're not looking at that, which in a sense is, if you're just focused on what's going on now, you're forgetting about the rest of your life. You're missing out on life itself.
Absolutely, but even more specifically, in your example, for instance, if I'm looking through the window, I'm looking at the window, really, right? So when I'm looking at the sky, I'm looking through a body of air, an ocean of air. There, it is. The character of the window says a lot about the world that I'm in when I'm looking through the window, right? The window could be broken. It could be dirty. It could be, on the other hand, it could be beautifully well kept, and it could be a stained glass window. There are so many ways in which my own position and the burden of my circumstances are expressed through the particular window that I happen to be that happens to be in front of me. And all of those things, of course, we can parse in our own experience, but what it means for experience to be ours is, and what it means for us to understand our own subjectivity as centered around, I'll use the kind of perceptual character of our corporeal relationship to the world, which is a concept in, say, phenomenology, broadly speaking. Of course, that's intrinsically limited, but what does it mean to assume the world beyond that? That's obviously a basic question from the beginnings of philosophical reflection. I'm not saying that it's not necessarily an important question, that question, but it is it's a question that is asked, and I think the mediating phenomenon that structures the materiality that we receive as perceivers is language. And so we have the possibility of pursuing other kinds of explorations through different ways of manipulating language. And that's certainly one of the things that I'm trying to do. I mean, it's a part of me would say, of course, it's simply a kind of carnival to pursue language in this way. There is an ecstatic experience in language that we can have that happens particularly when the language starts referring to itself and to its recursive character rather than to, say, a plotted character of a novel or something like that, of standard narrative.
So one of the things that sometimes we hear is that English, in comparison to other languages, can be quite not necessarily reductive, but have less options available in terms of words to describe phenomenons, objects in the world. Have you ever, we were speaking before the show that you're having, for example, Coda and previous books translated to other languages, but have you ever thought, for example, that English, writing your books initially in English was, in a way constraining you?
Yes, I'm sure it is. But it would be if I were writing in Portuguese or Italian or Swedish or Mandarin. The language is constraint. It's difficult. I mean, some writers, of course, can have a fluency in another language that allows them to do what they want to do in that language. Famously, for instance, we'll say Beckett wrote in French, and then and most of his great work, I would say, one should read it in English, but he wrote it in French and then translated it into English and published it in his own French and then in his own English, at least later on, which is extraordinarily interesting, and I would love to be able to do if I were competent enough in any other language but English. I would say that there's those limitations in any language. We have to accept them, and we push them. So I think that for me, there is a lot of flexibility in English in certain ways. Of course, English famously actually has the largest lexicon of any modern language, because English allows for English. It is a language that will take anything in. So it will take words from other languages, and it will keep them and continue to assimilate them, and new words and more new words. And it's not like the kind of neologism and the ease of making new words in German, say, from German roots. There are so many roots from so many other languages in English. It's there are Romance roots, Latin roots, Greek roots, German roots, so many things, French, many French words that have from medieval French in English. And so that breadth of the lexicon, I think, is one of the tools we have in English that is, even though in many respects, the syntactically, we don't have the same subtlety that one has in Portuguese or in French or Italian. But these are just all things that everyone has to cope with the limitations of the language that they are comfortable with, or that they live in, that they think in.
The constraint turns out to be something good because it forces you to think through and come up with alternative ways forward.
That's right. There's no choice, but also in some ways one wouldn't want a choice. I mean, if you think about a text, there are, I suppose maybe it's the only text like this, but say Finnegan's Wake, Joyce's great final work, which is perhaps the one attempt to write to write in many languages at once. But even that remains uniquely English as its base in a certain way, both syntactically and also with the understanding. Another thing that I think is a useful tool that in English is the way in which English orthography often preserves the peculiarities of orthography in the languages that it's pulling from. So you end up with the words present themselves as and present their history by virtue of the way in which they're spelled. And English orthography is quite has quite a lot of variance in it because of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's difficult for people who are learning English because in that respect, but it's also something that I think is a useful way of layering meaning in a work and in one's way of writing by thinking about how words are, one can present the work and the language etymologically to the reader.
It's really interesting. Yeah. Essentially, constraint makes the master.
Yeah.
I wanted to switch gears next, because you're not just a writer, you also have other pursuits in life, and I think they are quite interesting pairings. And I'd like to get your thoughts, for example, in photography, because photography is another big thing in your life, and nowadays everyone is a photographer, in quote, because everyone has a phone, can take a photo of the beautiful sunset, post it at, there you go. Of course, not that type of photographer, like a real photographer. And so I wanted to understand if, seeing the world through a camera lens has taught you anything different in how you approach your life and your ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an augmentation of the ways in which I think as a writer too, or they are similar. They're similar approaches in certain ways, and of course they're radically different because the discursive characteristics of image making are entirely distinct from the discursive nature of written work. But I think as a photographer, I'm a kind of referential photographer. I understand the photograph as having certain kinds of characteristics of the poem, say. There is a condensation of meaning in the photograph by virtue of all of the elements in the photograph that are in a certain way, and this is because of the nature of my practice, but are in a certain way not within control. So as controlled as my work is, and it is very controlled, it is still related to the world. It still has some documentary character to it. It's not, and it's I am photographing what I find rather than what I create. I'm not making a scene and then photographing it. I'm finding, but often in repetition and in ways that, how would you say, are structured by form and by a formal constraint. So even within, as a photographer, I photograph in series and I photograph with conceptual constraints for every series. And again, the constraint characteristic is another similarity, whether it's in writing kind of constraint around rhythm or prosody or conceptual frameworks, and the same happens in taking photographs for me or making images for me. The constraints of compositional constraints or conceptual constraints about what's in the series and what's repeated in the series. It's interesting. I think that there is this ubiquity of camera of the camera now because of the cell phone camera. And I would say another distinction between, one of the major distinctions between just taking snapshots, as it were, it's a kind of forced distinction, but I call that content creation rather than photography. It's a sort of online content. For me, and I actually don't use my cell phone in that way. I'm uninterested in those kinds of photographs, in making them or in sharing them. But a photograph is the object that is printed in the world. So when I'm photographing for the purposes of my practices as a photographer, I'm shooting towards the print. I'm always thinking about how I'm going to print it and what the print will look like and how it will be to have this physical form in front of you, whether it's in a book or it's in an exhibition. And that's a very different practice than taking something to post on Instagram or what have you that people do. But it is, in the broader sense, in answer to your question, as a practicing photographer, my seeing is a back formation of my photographing. So now when I look at the world, as I move through the world, I see the possibility of framing something in ways that feel compelling to me, either because of how they, for semantic reasons or purely compositional reasons, the ways in which the light falls in a particular moment. And on a particular setting, whatever it may be, as a quotidian setting, something that seems entirely unremarkable, except for the way in which the light is falling in that moment, or the light is reflecting in that moment. And so, in a certain sense, being a photographer in the way that I'm a photographer allows me or forces me into a continuous aesthetic experience of the world. I'm always thinking about the ways in which my vision is framing an image that could be made into a photograph.
It almost sounds like your brain is continuously rolling, like the camera is just rolling continuously.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's continuous, and my brain is continuously. It's not rolling though in a movie sense, because I don't happen to make cinematic images or moving images. I really am focused on the still image. So it's more like it's a constant a constant instantaneous snapping, but it is continuously, the shutter is always moving, and for me, and so is the the keyboard is always typing also. So
Do you? I'm just asking because in a way, it almost sounds tiring because the brain is always on alert. Like, oh, maybe this will be a good opportunity to frame this because it will turn out as a good still photograph in the end.
yeah.
How do you feel about that in terms of mental energy? Are you able to quote unquote turn it off?
Not really. And it is a little tiring, but I have a lot of energy. So I tend to be, this will perhaps be a surprise to your listeners, but I'm a fairly intense person. And I don't think I don't think I know how to not be. I mean, it's probably a failing on my part, but I am, and certainly a limitation. I'm, I'm never quite able to get to that point of turning off. In, yeah.
I mean, it's a passion, right?
Yes.
You're doing
It's
it because
it's just how I think I probably there are moments when I it can be enervating as you're suggesting, and so and the way in which that can be depressing, it can just feel like a weight at times. So that's the downside of having of being so intensely engaged in the particular ways that I am.
yeah, it almost sounds like a blessing and a curse, because a blessing in the sense that you're able to see the best of at any point in time. You can see the best of the scenery, but at the same time, it's taxing for you.
Yes, yeah, yeah, and of course, that I'm not really looking at. I'm not photographing things to be beautiful. I'm photographing things to be evocative, right? The same way that so there may be a beauty in the work, as it were, in a traditional sense of beauty, because of some uh, interest in the character of the composition, but that isn't my goal. Sometimes I'm specifically a series is focused on things that are quite ugly, or things that are of political or some political importance to me, and have are making. I mean, I think I'm always in the process of making some kind of ideological claim with my visual work, uh, and some kind of really with political implications, even things that seem less obviously so.
So in a sense, it's because you mentioned being a sort of documentary photographic approach. So is that in a sense would you say that you're documenting, things that you feel like is going unnoticed by people, or is it something that you think should be more prevalent and you're trying to use your photography as a medium to bring it forth?
Maybe both. Certainly things that are unnoticed, ways of seeing that are outside of common ways of seeing, or things that are not accessed by others, and of course using the compositional characteristics of my vision as a photographer to bring those things forward. So sometimes, often, I photograph things and people find them uh, completely unfamiliar, even though they are in their common line of sight. So I did a very large series some years ago, which produced a book uh, uh, called Pipe Valve Berlin, which is just a cleaning pipe structure, or a cleaning valve structure on drainage pipes in the east Berlin. And this is post, obviously, unification, but in the old East, um, uh, a cast iron, very strange structure. You can see it on my website if you'd like. And I found it fascinating and totemic in a certain way, and I photographed and the ways in which it related to Berlin as it was changing at the time. It was about 10 years ago. As it continues to change, as it was gentrifying, as Friedrichshain, where this particular valve largely still existed, was gentrifying and it was being replaced. And when I would exhibit, or when I have exhibited that work in Berlin, and even in Friedrichshain, people will say, "What are these things, and where are they?" And I'll say, "Well, there's one. You just walked past one as you came into the gallery." This kind of thing, and people really they don't see them, and that's an interesting thing. And I have pursued many series like that. But there are also some broader series like looking at interior spaces in squatted buildings in Rome, for instance, where many unhoused and migrant communities find shelter and make apartments, make contemporary domestic structures and domestic space and cultural space as well. And photographing the interiors of those spaces and showing how people live in those settings is something that is not seen, or those settings aren't seen by people generally, and people aren't welcomed into those settings generally. So gaining access and then showing the richness of those lives has both political implications for people and also aesthetic implications. They can it gives a particular kind of possible entrance into empathy. So
it's quite interesting because as you were explaining the examples in Berlin and in Rome, it almost sounds like your events, your photography galleries are essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, so what essentially I'm making a very self-contained description. It's almost documenting the common that goes unnoticed.
yes, I would say that is very often the case, and it's documenting, but it's also it can be that the photograph reveals it. It's only through the photograph that it can be revealed in a way that is noticeable. So I'll an example of that is in another very common circumstance, a series that I did, or another common object, common scene in Tokyo in Japan, photographing the remnants, vestiges of instructional or adhesive tape on the floors of the subway system in Tokyo. So it's in many colors. It's to indicate danger or direction or other things, and it lasts long after its purpose. And so for me, framing that work as we're framing those tableaus as paintings of a sort, as abstract paintings, as fields of color and of texture that form very distinct compositional frameworks. That's part of this sort of way of seeing the world that is not present outside of the way of seeing the world. So people might notice that tape on the floor, but they don't see it circumscribed in a way that is compositionally compelling, or that allows it to rise into the form of art, essentially, however we want to define that.
Yeah, you're breathing new life into boring, mundane things.
Yes. Yes.
I think
So
it's a really interesting perspective on you will get attention. I'm making a blank statement right now to link it back to your idea. So you're in a way proving that idea of you need to be careful on how you present your idea to make sure that it's heard, to make sure that it's seen. In this case, the tape. People will mostly ignore it day to day. Just tape
yes.
on the ground. But the way you present it, the way you photograph it, the way you frame it, makes it almost like a piece of art.
Yes. That's right. As though it were, in fact, put down as a piece of art, even though it clearly wasn't, and clearly isn't if you see it outside of the photograph.
But the way you can transmute it into something beautiful, it's quite fulfilling, I imagine.
Yes. Yes, it is. It's something that I enjoy that enormously.
One thing I also wanted to ask is, so photography and writing at first they might seem quite distinct, so quite different worlds. But for example, in this conversation, you have already mentioned that constraint becomes a key pillar in both, because
Yeah.
that constraint enforces you to go further. Actually, it's not just a straight path, you need to go around a bit, but by going around, you find something that you will not have found otherwise, and makes the end result that much more valuable. And
Right.
so I wanted to gauge your opinion on what of those common pillars or skills or approaches have you found across photography and writing that have enhanced your creative capacity, make you be a better artist, essentially.
Hmm. Yeah. As you say, they are very different forms, but I think it is. I think that my particular appreciation for repetition, for instance, as an example,
Repetition.
repetition of form, repetition of epistrophe in writing, the repetition of a phrase over and over again for the purposes of emphasis and really, or making a kind of incantatory rhetorical device, and but also repetition, syntactical repetition, and recursive characteristics within a sentence, which then within a series of photographs, there is a similar possibility of repetition across many different works, discrete works. So I think this is an interesting thing that, for me, I understand my visual work as both consisting of individual pieces and of those same pieces in series. They are understandable. This is something that happens in photography sometimes, but not just in my work, but in many other people's work. But it is a particularly literary sense of repetition that I bring to the photograph, I think. And again, this notion within within the written world, and especially the poem, say, or what one understands to be poetic discourse, of condensation, which is to say, meaning that that does not take a straight path, and that allows for a multiplicity in any given moment. And that happens in the photograph routinely and somewhat organically, but one can ignore it or one can emphasize it. And for me, it's a point of emphasis in my work as a photographer.
I was just thinking, I think, so I was trying to essentially in my mind to respect this entire conversation, and I think it really summarizes quite well of repetition and the constraint as pillars to your creative pursuit.
Yes, absolutely. That isn't completely accurate, I think, and a good insight into my work, for sure.
Stephen, this was fantastic. It was awesome speaking with you. And for the listeners who might be intrigued to, maybe visit one of your future events or, purchase Coda. So how can people connect with you and your work?
Well, I have a website, which is just my name, Steven Seidenberg, at stevenseidenberg.com. And I'm on Instagram. That's these sorts of usual ways. I think that Coda can be ordered online, purchased through all the usual sources. There are the free to download audiobooks from all the services, Spotify or iTunes or what have you. But also all of that is linked on my website. If people want to take a look under audiobooks, then you can see all the links and you download or stream them gratis. What are some other ways that they can find? Those are some major ways. Books are coming out, as I mentioned. Coda will be out in Portuguese in the spring. I'm very honored to say and very pleased to say my book Plain Sight is coming out in Italian translation in this spring as well. And that book is already in Portuguese translation under the title A Vista. And so, yeah, there are a lot of ways to find me, and, send an email if that's of interest. That would be that I'm easy to find and easy to be in touch with should anybody desire that. So, yeah.
This is going to be an exciting spring season for you then.
I hope so. I hope I'll see you in Portugal maybe with the new
book. Will be
it
nice
would be
to
great.
meet you in Portugal.
It would be wonderful to meet you in person. It's been such a pleasure.
Likewise, Stephen. Thank you very much, and see you soon, hopefully.
I hope so. Okay, good. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.